He's retired Canadian Special Forces, a sniper that served extensive tours, saw combat in Afghanistan, and experienced tremendous trauma, both in combat and when he returned home. And he's coming up on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Brought to you by 4patriots.com. That's the number 4patriots.com. They offer the world's best survival food, the Patriot Power Generator 2000X and more. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use code LET to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order. Plus, free shipping on orders over $97. And a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com. That's a number 4patriots.com. Use code LET to get 10% off. Connecting with us from Canada, we have Jeff DePatie on the phone. Jeff is a retired Canadian military sniper, special forces operator, and he is heavily involved with a group, the Special Forces Experience. Go to their website, specialforcesexperience.com. Before we get started, Jeff, I want everyone to know we are changing our name to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Everything else remains the same. Jeff, thank you for your service, and thanks for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, Jay, thanks for having me on. The pleasure is absolutely all mine. It's a real delight to be with you today.
How long were you in Canadian military?
I served for approximately 15 years in a few different capacities, from full-time regular, and then I segued out into the reserve forces, the reserve special forces, where I was still training operators.
And you specialized in, maybe that's not the right term, but you specialized in being a sniper. Am I correct?
I wore many badges, many hats, Jay. But yeah, I would say that was the one that I would hold up and flash the most is, the fact that I was a tier 1 sniper, yes.
I'm sure there was a lot of training, a lot of experience that went with that position. I've never served in the military, so I'm sure there's a lot of direct references and comparisons to the United States military. I've had many police on that were military veterans first. And as a matter of fact, I tell people I'm very fortunate. When I was trained as a rookie police in Baltimore in 1981, many of the experienced law enforcement officers there were Vietnam combat veterans. And we had a few Korean War veterans that were command staff. And they were phenomenal police. They were really good at de-escalation. They were very good at community policing, all those things. So my hat's off to all military people.
Well, I appreciate that. There's a wealth of experience and education that you can't get anywhere else serving in the military, similar to the law enforcement world, that creates, especially when it comes to dealing in real time, as you know, where real decisions are made and real impact happens.
I'm sure that, first of all, I want people to understand, I don't have a point of comparison to what Jeff's going to talk about. He's going to talk about his experience. I can only imagine what combat was like. And I'll be honest with you, Jeff, most Hollywood movies don't do justice to police work, so I imagine they're probably far off base when it comes to military conflict as well.
Yes. It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking about that yesterday, watching a movie about Iraq in particular. And it's impossible. I mean, they can give you high production value and make it very entertaining, but it is impossible to collect and show the subtle psychological nuances, the moments in time that when you're in the heat of the moment and all your juices are flowing, all the adrenaline's going, and the complete chaos of everything around you, even though you're trained, it's impossible to really show that. And to show not just the moment, but everything that comes with that afterwards, impossible to capture in video. But we do a better job, I think, through stories such as your show.
Well, one of the things I got to say, I'm rather impressed that you actually watched a movie about military combat, because I've gotten to the point where I very rarely ever watch, especially American-produced police, any kind of drama, because they're usually so far off base. They're not even remotely close to truth. I spend more time watching BBC-related content than I do American content, because I think they do a better job, especially when it comes to character development. What is your impression of the movies and character development? I know that they got to make it entertaining. I know they have a time frame they got to do. And I know that's not part of the story, but everybody you serve with, they're all unique individuals.
Yes. When you expand their stories, the nuances, right? The threads that make the tapestry that are them, that is the real beauty of the drama. I think it's a bit of a lost form in film itself, personally. This is like really the day and age of the short attention span, high clip rate, coming at you the whole time. And I feel like they're missing that, though, because there's so many. The real point of story is the lessons, right? The risk and the reward that were there. And, confession, I watch them very rarely as well. But every now and then I find I glean something when I push myself out of that comfort zone. Not just of judgment of the film, but my own, that maybe there's a little something there that choking it down for me. It's about trying to glean what I may be missing a truth about myself. Now, obviously, a lot of those movies aren't even going to begin to do that. So yeah, I'm a little bit more discerning in those choices. They're less the tentpole productions of Hollywood and usually more of an independent-sized film.
So do you look at these films as judging where you're at in life compared to where the characters are?
Well, as you know, when you try to recall any event where, excitement, where your heart rate, where you're not in the black, but, stepping into those elevated zones where the brain starts to process differently, things are lost. And I think that's why people go to legions and their war halls and things like that, is to recollect some of that so that they can bring it back, so they can process it more properly. And really glean new lessons from it. So that's where I do. And then sometimes it's am I avoiding putting my hand on the stove?
Yeah.
In that, okay, what's here? I got burnt there. Is there something that could be stirred up that I'm not expecting? Because that happens a lot too for me, is these little moments that occurred and I didn't even realize that they had an impact on my life, so it's just one of those memes for me.
I don't know how it could not have an impact on your life. And by the way, I've not found the magic solution. The term that the psychologists seem to hate is avoidance. There's things I avoid because I don't like how I get. And when I get off the beam, for lack of better words, it's not a short-term thing. It affects everything. And it affects my relationship with my wife. It affects my mood with other people. I tend to isolate. I don't want to be around people until I get back to what I call my happy spot. We are talking with Jeff DePatie. He is a retired Canadian military sniper. He's also one of the co-founders of the Special Forces Experience. Check out their website, thespecialforcesexperience.com. When we return to the Law Enforcement Talk radio show, we're going to talk about military combat, his conflicts that he experienced in Afghanistan, and then the personal tragedy that occurred when he returned home. Ever miss an episode of the radio show? Never fear. You can sign up for our free email newsletter and get access to past podcast episodes. Plus, all subscribers are automatically entered in all future contests. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Scroll down to the sign up area. That's letradioshow.com. We promise we will never spam you. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. National security experts are warning our aging power grid is more vulnerable than ever. Imagine a blackout lasting not days, but weeks or months. Your life would be frozen in time right at the moment the power fails. Lights all over the country go out, throwing people into total darkness. That's why having your own solar power is more important than ever. With the new Patriot Power Generator 2000X, you get a solar generator that doesn't install into your house because it's portable. You can take it with you, even use it inside. But it's powerful enough for your phones, medical devices, or even your fridge. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com and use code LET to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in a store, including the Patriot Power Generator. You'll also get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97, and a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Just go to 4patriots.com. That's number 4patriots.com and use code LET to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Use code LET to get yours today.
Discover the exciting world of podcasts at hefepods.com. From captivating stories to life advice and much more. There's a podcast for every interest and passion. Be entertained by your favorite radio personalities in both English and Spanish. Don't waste any more time. Find a great English or Spanish language podcast to follow and discover a world of possibilities in your own language. Find the best podcasts at hefepods.com.
This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, returning to our conversation with Jeff DePatie. He is a retired Canadian military special forces sniper. And when he returned home, in addition to all the combat and conflict that they experienced, him and his team, when he came home, he and his wife experienced major trauma, which he'll talk about a little bit later on. I want to go to your military experience in Afghanistan. And I would like to think that some of what you went through was unique, but I have a feeling it wasn't.
I would like to think everyone's experience is unique, Jay. And I say that so that we can continue to glean why we do these things, especially when it comes to war fighting, when it comes to when and how we use violence. And it comes with a great morality tale, as I'll segue into here. On a tour on Roto 6, 2008, what we call Apathina, named conveniently after the goddess of war. We were in Afghanistan. We had been there for a few months now. And it really is a more prehistoric place. A lot of people, until you experience something, you can read a book and you can watch a movie and they're great and you can visualize and you can do all these tools you want. We had been operating, doing a few different things. By this time, we had gotten away from using vehicles, so we're walking around everywhere in the desert heat, humping our bags, and they're not light. We got mortar rounds, all kinds of ammo, backup supply, food. It was grueling. It was also wonderful. If you want to be a soldier and that's what you want to do, when you get to do it, you better enjoy it in some capacity. But now and then we would roll around in what we call Lab 3s. Down here in the U.S., they're called Strikers, and they have different variants. They're basically an 8-wheeled beast. The Taliban would call them the Green Dragons because they spit fire from their 25 mil, which is just an awesome tool of war. Anyhow, I was part of Platoon 1-3, Lucky 1-3. And we had the weapons set, the platoon commander, the signaler. We kind of were the head of the platoon, if you will. And the interpreter would be with us, the Tarjuman. And they were wonderful. A lot of them were out of Afghanistan proper. Some of them came from the U.S. and Canada. And they were all vetted, and they all did their jobs really well. They integrated it within the teams. They were part of the team. They were there when we were in firefights, when we were rocket attacked, RPGs, whatever. So you build this bond with them, and you build a trust because they are your ears, right? Because what they were doing for us is they would monitor the ICOM radios. They would listen to the chatter that's going on. So when we'd go to different areas, the Taliban or Al-Qaeda was in the area, would start chatting, like, okay, soldiers are around, and then sometimes they'd start to set up defensive postures. They'd start to set up for attack. And I started noticing that he would key in the ICOM. So he's only supposed to be listening. If he keys it in, that means they can hear what we're saying. And, the first time I saw it, I thought it might be an error, and then I started watching him more and more and more. And eventually it became pretty obvious. It was like, okay, this guy is transmitting our stuff, right? All our coordination is happening in the back of this lab for whatever we're going to do in that village. And I brought it up to my friend Cookie, who, he validated. And that turned out, so we brought it up the chain of command. He was arrested by the military police and questioned. And it didn't take very long to find out that his family, his wife and his children, had been kidnapped by the Taliban and were being held hostage. And he was being forced to spy, in essence, on us. Now, this story particularly sits with me a little bit heavier, as I recall it, because there's a thing in combat, and I would imagine in the policing world too, that's called moral wounds. When decisions are made that you can't fully wrap your head around, and perhaps on the other side, you feel the weight of that morality as a right-wrong struggle. So, as I said, he was arrested, and he was properly handled, all that kind of stuff. But he was set out the front gate of the FOB we were in, the Forward Operating Base, Spurlingar, in the Panjwai district of Afghanistan, which is like the spiritual birthplace of the Taliban. I mean, this was their homeland. We let him out, and the local warlords or whatever captured him, and they hung him in a grape hut. And it wasn't shortly after that, through our Afghan partners, I believe it was, the Afghan National Army, that they found him. He was hanging in a grape hut. And, no time to really do any investigations. There's no time to follow up to try to see what's happening with his family. I would only imagine they were killed. The warfighters, the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda, I just use those terms kind of generally because the lines started to get very blurred by 2008 of who was who, would have most definitely killed them. And on the other side of that, like someone like myself, seeing this thread unfold, not knowing what to do, these are different circumstances than, GI is given drills for. But just because we were hands tied, this unfortunate event just compounded. And here you go, you have this person who was, I believe in my heart, trying to be a really good man, and put into this ultimate, between the hammer and the iron, between the hammer and the anvil. And those kinds of moments sit with you, Jay.
Yeah, I don't know that I would have any kind of, and I'm sure you've tried to resolve this in your mind many ways. I don't know of any way that I could come up with anything because I've got nothing to relate it to. And I think many people, and you're probably reluctant to talk about this, and certainly around the barbecue, because most people don't have a concept of what it's like, myself included. When you're dealing with groups of people that are that violent, and when you say that he was put into a choice where his family was kidnapped and tortured, and you're going to do this or they're going to be killed, I don't know what I would do. I know I'm not going to jump in here and say, well, if I was there, I would have done this, because those people, they weren't there. That's why I tell them all the time, you weren't there. You don't have to make the decisions and deal with the consequences. We're talking with Jeff DePatie. He is a retired Canadian military sniper. We're going to talk more about his combat experience in Afghanistan and then the personal tragedy he and his wife went through when he returned home and what he's doing today. You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. Get access to free podcast versions of the show and more on Facebook. Do a search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
I have some exciting news to share with you. You are going to love my Your Diet Do-Over Do-It-Yourself course on harmonywithfood.com, which means you could do everything at your own pace. I put my heart and soul into this course. Have you been on every diet there is only to gain the weight back? If your relationship with food is, not that good, you should purchase the Your Diet Do-Over course. Go over to harmonywithfood.com, click the Your Diet Do-Over tab, and get started today.
Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Yes, we are changing our name ever so slightly. I'm John J. Welly, joined by Jeff DePatie. Jeff is retired Canadian military Special Forces military sniper. He's also heavily involved with a group called the Special Forces Experience. Check out their website, thespecialforcesexperience.com. As a matter of fact, he's one of the co-founders, I do believe. Jeff, before we went to break, we were talking about your experience in Afghanistan with the interpreter. And you mentioned something, the moral injury or moral wounds. And when I first hear that, Jeff, I think I want to recoil from it. Like, it's assigning some sort of value that I did something wrong. But that's not what we're talking about at all. And when the only way I can compare, and it's a bad word, is when I had to use extreme violence in situations, it went counter to how I was raised. It went counter to totally not just the moral, religious, psychological, good, bad, right, wrong, and different. And I really had a bit of difficulty at the time, not so much now, understanding that I could be capable of such violence. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, and I agree with what you're saying. One of the things we do from our experience is we try to draw value, right? That's how, when we're processing everything, we try to, okay, I moved these chess pieces and this was valuable to person X, Y, and Z. In this case, finding that value overall, as you zoom out in the case with the interpreter, with the Tajiman, it gets a little more difficult. Mm-hmm. And then we start, that's why it's more of a psychological term, moral, is it right, is it wrong? Where, yeah, it does do that. And it does put me at the center of that. So it's been more difficult for me to draw the value from that moment. Now you say, you specifically use the word in a gunfight. When the circumstances have led to someone trying to kill you and those that you would call allies, lines change completely.
Right.
I don't want to say the morality goes out the window, because it doesn't, because that humanness is there. Case in point, this is about 6 months into our tour, and we were gearing up for an op. We're working out of an old abandoned Russian school, and it's it's about 1:30 in the morning. Nobody slept because we're about to march out 15 clicks on foot, no vehicles, minimum support with air, all that kind of stuff, and do some presence patrols. Now, like I'm saying, like when I say load up, once again, like 130 pounds on your back through the night, not having slept, people are looking for you. And this was past the 290 sting, which will have very little resonance with most people, but basically into the heart of where the insurgents were at this time in the ISAF campaign. And we're going to do a raid on a target. It definitely has stuff going on, no doubt about it. We got the drones running, all this kind of stuff. And we go and we set up. It takes us a few hours to get out there walking. We set up our clothing, we cut all cutoffs in, all the machine guns, all that kind of stuff. We go in and we clear the compound, and nobody's there. There's nothing. It's like you're interacting with it, but there was nothing there. So that's a bit of a disappointment when you're like ready to grab you and tell to push the campaign forward. So, we regroup, we kind of rejig what the op is going to be for now. And we're sitting there, and it's starting, the sun's coming up. It's about, I'd say it was probably about 10 o'clock. And we're starting to pick up, and it's a joint op. So there's our platoon, another platoon from our company, from my company, and then a platoon of Americans working at a big, massive kind of triangular shape, but spread out over, half a mile kind of thing. And snap, here it comes again. Okay. By this point, I would say that we were, I don't want to use quite the dramatic term as battle hardened, but we were hard. We were as hard as Christmas candy and about just as smart at that point. We weren't a stranger to being in a gunfight. And it's coming from all kinds of angles. And it's difficult, right? Because they're tucked in amongst these sand huts, and they got the grape rows, which are about 6 feet tall, and they can hide behind that. They have every advantage over us except, our will to survive. And M72, shoulder-fired rockets. We got machine guns, a mortar fire, and then we were lucky enough to get some air support, some Apaches, in fact. Because there is Kiowas in the area, but they don't have the same kind of guided missiles. So it's like a fire and forget. They're great. They're great to work with. The American Kiowa pilots were awesome. And we're in it for a couple hours. So that was one thing about Afghanistan. You could get into gunfights for a couple hours. And, we go through that one, okay. That evening, we get hit again. One of the Americans is shot in the hip. And this is like a really beautiful moment for showing the coalition working together, because the Canadians are there working on them. We're getting them ready for evac. And in comes a British Chinook. That's the double-rotored helicopter. Female pilot. She comes in, does this awesome banking move, comes down, barely touches the ground. Load him in. He goes, and thankfully surgery saves his life. Now, that's quite a day for anybody, because now we haven't slept, and that's the day we came into. And that night we watched probably some collateral damage, but the fighters load up their dead into wheelbarrows through the night vision. And then 2 more days, Jay, it was the same kind of thing. They were like using something out of Art of War. They attack in the mornings, and then kind of by evening light, trying to use that to their advantage. Of course, the only advantage they have is surprise and that it's their ground. I mean, we own every other advantage. I do have to give them that. They did try. And it was epic. It was something, where, this was the moment that if ever I walk out of this, I may be able to find some glory in it. And, knock on wood, at the time, we all got out of there. Everybody lived. We did build up some level of hearts and minds with the locals. And then we were exfilling. And in comes the artillery. We created this smoke screen that was like miles long and probably half a mile high. It was like super impressive. The machines we had for carrying out war. And, this is getting closer to the end of the tour, and we're going back, and we're still interacting with our environment. We're all dead tired. So this is where, those symptoms of stress can start setting, where your faculties start to they're removed. Your ability to have full awareness is removed. And finally, we made it back.
Let me take a break here. We're going to return to our conversation with Jeff DePatie in just a few moments. He is a retired Canadian Military Special Forces sniper. He's talking about the combat experiences in Afghanistan. And when we return on a Law Enforcement Today when we return to the Law Enforcement Talk radio show, he's going to tell us about the tragedy he and his wife experienced when he returned home, his effects on him, and what he does today. Has this ever happened to you? You sign up for a free email newsletter, and within hours, you're receiving tons of spam. That won't happen when you subscribe for the free Law Enforcement Today radio show email newsletter. We won't spam you. No more than 2 emails a week. I promise. All subscribers are automatically entered in all future contests. Sign up at letradioshow.com. Scroll down to the sign-up area. That's letradioshow.com. This is the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. What is the Haunting or Not podcast? It's a free podcast that takes a different approach to ghost stories, hauntings, and cases of demonic forces. Husband and wife podcast hosts mix comedy, facts, and a healthy dose of police evidence skepticism to help you decide, are these hauntings or not? Helping you decide what's real and what is fake or an overhyped exaggeration. From world-famous cases to lesser-known reports, they talk about them all in the Haunting or Not podcast, available for free on most podcast platforms. Or do a Google search for Haunting or Not podcast. This is the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. I'm John J. Wiley, returning to our conversation with Jeff DePatie. Jeff is retired Canadian military special forces sniper. He did multiple tours in Afghanistan, and he is one of the co-founders of the Special Forces Experience. Check out their website, thespecialforcesexperience.com. When we were talking earlier, Jeff, I'm just listening because I don't have a point of comparison. And what I've learned to do, and this show has helped a lot with this, is I don't compare anymore my story to someone else's. You said something early on in the interview that everybody's experience is a bit unique. Even though they're very similar, it's their experience and what they bring to the table and how it impacts them. I can't imagine going through extensive combat like you described in Afghanistan and how it was, between the interpreter, the gunfights, all these other things, maintaining that combat readiness, for lack of better words, for hours at a time. When I call them adrenaline jumps, where the adrenaline, I can't believe you're trying to kill me, and all of a sudden you're in full-on fight or flight mode. That's all there is you can do. I can't explain it any other way. But maintaining that for hours, and then not sleeping. And then you said something, okay, when this is all over with, if I make it out of this is my moment of glory, I'm done.
Yeah. Because I think as men, I won't speak for the ladies, that's what your nature of why you do this, but there's perhaps something you can pull from it we call glory, right? It's a word that we really don't know much about because it can be very hard to find. We don't really actually know what we're looking for, right? As I was saying, returning back to the fob, dead tired. Tired is not actually the word that I would use. But like you said, you dumped everything is off kilter, and I returned and I called my wife, and she had just lost, while I was there, our baby. She was 6 months along and she had lost the baby. And this speaks to the level of dissociation that I was feeling. I actually hung up on her. I actually yelled at her and then hung up on her. And that was the thing, right? We're in such a constricted nature at that point that my own survival for these last few days became all that really mattered. And I had no capacity to be there for her. And, those are those moments I struggle with. Like,
yeah, look, I didn't go through this, Jeff, but I can tell you right now, as a human being, I can understand. I don't know words to use. I would feel horrible about myself. And I know that was not your intention. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I know that was not your intention, but we look back and say, I'm not God. I'm not Superman. I can only do things the best I can. And you'd been through superhuman things already.
Yeah, I don't feel judged, Jay. I think it is an important topic, and that's why it's important to have these discussions. Sometimes we have these discussions and it's just to perpetuate something. But in this case, I think it's about stopping things so that, young men and women hear these kinds of stories and they're like, okay, there's a chance that I'm going to have to react in some way similar. I don't hold great shame for myself because I've definitely learned how to transmute all these things into gold. And in essence, that has begun, that was some of the start state for where I'm at. My relationship with her dissolved. It came apart, and over time I developed severe PTSD to the point of, I was not just suicidal. I almost jumped off a tower in Las Vegas, in fact, And that was the absolute rock bottom of my life. And every inch since then has been, how do I bring back, I went into the dark night of my soul. How do I bring back something good so that others don't have to repeat not my mistakes so much, but the lessons I had to hoist aboard, those difficult moments in time that come with me. Everything in my life now has been about this concept of post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Turning those moments into something beautiful.
I'm there with you because without going really deep into my story, I became so angry that I was impossible to live with. And it led to eating problems, sleeping problems, drinking too much, you name it, everything that came along with it. But the gains I've made have been because people that have been there were willing to share with me like you just did. I didn't get a lot of help, and it wasn't for lack of trying, from the so-called professionals. It was the people that had been through combat and had seen the ugly side of how they responded. And when I say ugly, that's not a judgmental thing. It's just saying that's not how I want to be remembered today.
Yeah, well, that's where the world should be thankful, right, Jay? Wisdom, that's all there is to it. And so it's not like thankful, but it's learn from, the things you went through, learn from the things I went through. Because so much about, the inadequacies of the system's abilities to actually help us.
Right.
Most of the systems around us don't really know how to help us. And what are the things that we can do to bring some humanity to this? Where, the anger is such a clouding emotion. It shifts our perception. It starts to shift our body and how that sits with us.
Yeah.
It tangles.
And plus, it keeps all threats away. That's the thing. Anything that felt threatening, I just get angry at and push them away. And then I'd be despondent because I was all by myself. Poor me.
Exactly. It's a survival mechanism gone awry.
Right.
It has its place, but then it gets turned on and it stays with us too long. And then it's about, because nobody deserves to stay in that state forever.
That's exhausting.
Especially those who had some kind of service.
And those that are loved ones don't deserve to go through that as well. I want to fast forward. You mentioned something, post-traumatic growth. And I know we don't have a lot of time. Can you talk briefly about what that is?
In essence, if we were to think about it very quickly and kind of colloquially, post-traumatic growth is the opposite of post-traumatic stress disorder. A post-traumatic stress disorder moves us into a non-coping mechanism, such as a high anger state. I don't need to go down all those rabbit holes. We all know when we're depressed. Post-traumatic stress disorder keeps you there. Traumatic growth is about taking those lessons, finding meaning, finding value, rebuilding your body, mind, and soul, and growing past the person you were before.
There you go.
It's the ultimate reason for why we suffer.
And by the way, Jeff, I can't think of anybody that can describe it better than you, and we're almost out of time. I want to touch base on the Special Forces Experience, the website, specialforcesexperience.com. What is it? What do you do?
Yeah, in essence, what we do, Jay, is we use the concept of intentionally facilitated post-traumatic growth. We put people through stressful situations so that they can learn very quickly. Nothing teaches us like great love or great fear quite as quickly. And it's been an absolute gift. And from it, we actually created a documentary called The Dark Night of Our Soul, which is all about the gift that every one of us holds right now in transmuting those sufferings for the greater good, not just for themselves, but for the greater good as well.
Would it be safe to say this is kind of your passion now?
Yes, it's. At 8 years old, I would have never known I would be into post-traumatic growth, but it absolutely is. It fills me with purpose. It gives me my ability to use all my skills I've developed, and most important is a service.
And by the way, I think it puts some useful purpose to the pain of your past. By the way, this was Jeff DePatie, Canadian military, Special Forces sniper, retired, and the website is specialforcesexperience.com. Jeff, thanks very much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, Jay, the pleasure was all mine. Absolutely.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.